If you're just getting started with acrylic painting, you don't need a room full of art supplies. You really just need a simple painting system. Everything I'm going to show you today has earned a permanent place in my studio. These aren't just supplies I own, they're the ones I reach for every time I paint because they've proven themselves through the years of painting and teaching. Today I'll show you what I use and, more importantly, why I use it. Let's start with the surface. I almost always paint on wood. That's simply my personal preference. I enjoy the solid surface, the way it feels under the brush. Before I paint, I seal the wood with a GAC 100. It creates a barrier coat that prepares the surface for the painting. There are lots of choices for painting surfaces. There isn't one right answer, but I wanted to share what my favorite surface is. The next thing you might want to consider is an easel. Could you paint without one? Of course. Many artists paint right on a tabletop, but I do think an easel makes painting more enjoyable. It lets you work at a comfortable angle, it makes it easier to step back and look at your painting. And you don't need an expensive studio easel. A simple tabletop easel works wonderfully. I used one for many years. Particularly if you're painting small paintings, you might want to think about a tabletop easel first. Let's talk about paint. One of the biggest surprises for beginners is that I don't use dozens and dozens of colors. I paint with a very limited palette. A limited palette teaches color mixing much faster. It helps you understand how the colors relate to one another. So instead of searching for the perfect tube of paint, you learn how to mix the color you need. I think that's one of the best ways to build confidence. I'll link a full video about my limited palette of colors if you'd like to know exactly what colors I use. I mix all of my paint on a glass palette. I love it because it's easy to clean. It gives me a smooth surface for mixing, and I can clearly see my colors while I'm working. It's one of the simple tools that makes painting easier. I have an entire video about my palette setup and how I keep my paint fresh, so I'll be sure to link that below if you'd like to see the complete system. One of my favorite studio tricks is using a mister on my palette. When I'm finished painting, I lightly mist my paint, and then I place a plastic tray cover over the palette and slide the whole thing into a Ziploc bag. This simple system keeps my paint workable for a surprisingly long time. Less wasted paint, less setup tomorrow, and more time painting. I regularly use two mediums. The first medium is Derivan Matisse Open Medium. I mix this open medium into my palette colors so my paint stays workable. I also have a dedicated video explaining how I use open medium, so I'll link it below. The second is airbrush medium. The airbrush medium is what I use instead of water. It helps me create thinner, smoother paint. You can certainly thin your paint with water, but I just feel like I get better results with the airbrush medium. Most of my painting is done with long-handled filbert brushes. I also keep a liner brush handy for fine details. One thing I'd encourage beginners to remember, you don't need dozens of brushes and you don't need expensive brushes. I'd rather have a few brushes that feel comfortable in my hand than a huge collection of brushes I rarely use. You'll also find a palette knife on my table almost every day. My favorite is the Liquitex number 7 palette knife. A palette knife is amazing for larger mixes of paint that you need to make, and it's fun to use a palette knife for thicker applications of paint. This may sound like a funny thing to include in my list of supplies, but I always use the same water container, and it always sits in the same place on my desk. After years of painting, I don't have to think about where it is. My hand simply reaches for it. Little routines like that remove those tiny distractions. They help me spend more time thinking about the painting instead of thinking about my workspace. And here's where you can add a little personal touch. Use a container that means something to you. My water container is a pitcher that my husband sent me flowers in years ago. The next supply is paper towels. Nothing fancy, just paper towels. They're always within reach. Pre-tear a small stack before you paint so you can easily grab a fresh towel whenever you need it. I love to use tracers when I paint. It's just nice to have a very clean transfer of what I'm going to paint on my substrate. If you've taken one of my classes, you've probably noticed that I include tracers. I do that because I want the students to spend their time learning to paint and have the wonderful, clean transfer of the image. I simply transfer the design using chalk pastel on the back of the tracer to get that clean line that easily disappears when I paint. Once a painting is completely finished and dry, I varnish it. And I love this varnish. I'll link a video showing exactly how I use this varnish. I also keep one brush that is only used for varnishing. It never touches any other paint. That helps me avoid any stray pigments or dust or little surprises in that final finish. One thing that probably isn't obvious, my supplies always live in the same places. My water sits in the same spot. My palette is always in the same place. Even the paints on the palette are arranged the same. My brushes are always nearby. Over time, those little routines become muscle memory. I don't spend much time looking for things. My hands simply know where to reach. As you can see, this list is very short. You don't need a room full of supplies. These supplies won't make you a better painter. They simply remove little frustrations so you can spend more time doing the one thing that actually does make you better, painting. That's really the goal. Build a simple system, get lots of brush hours. As you continue painting, your studio will naturally grow right along with your skills. Don't let supplies become the reason that you don't start. Start with a few good basics. The important thing is to keep painting.